Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 137 of the podcast. In this episode, I talk with Zach Matchett all about preteen ministry, which is something that a lot of leaders are talking about now, whether that means fifth, sixth for you like it does for Zach, or we launched our fourth, fifth environment just a few weeks ago. So regardless of how you define that or what those ages are, it's a popular conversation. Lots of leaders are wanting to create this environment. If they don't have it, or if they do have it, you want to make it even better. Zach at his church, they've had some different iterations, but they've done it in some form or fashion for like 6 or 7 years. So it was great to have a conversation with someone that has done it for a while, learned some things, made some changes and tweaks and all that. So I think you'll love this interview, kind of getting some insight there. He also shares some really cool stuff they do to train small group leaders. So even if you aren't starting a preteen ministry, you might be interested in that. And we're going to include all of that in the show notes, which you can get at nickblevins.com/episode 137. Before we jump into that interview, though, I want to let you know that there's a brand new course that I just released with Ministry Boost called The 5 Barriers to Volunteer Recruitment. And it's a simple, short course, 5 modules, where I just talk through the 5 barriers and kind of give you an action item or two that you could take out of each one to remove that barrier in your church, which would allow you to recruit more volunteers. This is an on-demand course, meaning you can take it whenever you like. It's normally $25, but it's brand new, and we're just offering it for a short window here for $10. If you want to take that course, just go to ministryboost.org, click on courses, and then find that 5 barriers course in there, and you can check that out. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you take the course, I'd love to hear stories. What did you implement? What did you change? And then especially down the road, how did you remove that barrier, and how did it impact your volunteer recruitment or not? I think that would be fun to hear from, and I love seeing churches be a little bit more intentional about volunteer recruitment. And the 5 barriers are kind of bigger than your normal things that you would address when it comes to volunteer recruitment. And I think they're usually hidden, like you can't even tell they're in the way. And so I hope if you take that course, you'll address them, make some changes, and a lot of those changes will be bigger than just maybe you can make in your own ministry, but then see the fruit from that for sure, because I know those barriers are getting in the way for a lot of us recruiting volunteers. So check that out at ministryboost.org and click on courses there, find the 5 barriers course. But let's go ahead now and jump into my conversation with Zach about their preteen ministry, how it started, how it's been used since then, even in his case, how it looks at different sites, because they're a multi-site church. So let's listen. Well, today I'm joined by Zach Matchett. Welcome to the podcast, Zach.
How's it going, Nick? Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really appreciative of just what you do in the podcast, and that I get to hang out with you and learn from you and maybe help teach some things about preteen ministry.
Yeah, today we want to learn from you and what you're doing there. And of course, I did mention to you before we start recording, we just launched our 4th and 5th grade environment, and preteen is 5th and 6th for you. So we're going to talk all about that. And I feel like people are really interested in this. Dan Scott's book, Caught in Between, and it's just like church after church is launching something specific for preteens every week. So I'm excited to hear what you do there, and you've been doing it longer than that. So tell us about yourself, your church, and your role there in the preteen ministry.
Yeah, so I've been in full-time ministry for coming up on 13 years now. I had a couple-year break right around the time I got married and was finishing my seminary degree. So that was the in-between season for me. But I've been here at Northview Church, which is a multi-site church in central Indiana. We have 7 locations. 4 of those are in Hamilton County, which is on the north side of Indianapolis. And then we have 3 others that are kind of around central Indiana. And I've been serving on the student ministry team ever since I got here. But when I got here, I was actually the student worship pastor. I was a worship leader at my previous church in Muncie, Indiana, about an hour northeast of Indy, at a church called Union Chapel. And I was kind of in a dual role there, doing kind of high school pastor / worship leader for student ministry. So I came here, I was specific to worship ministry. And then about a year and a half into that, we kind of called an audible, and I moved into the middle school pastor role. And at the time I was overseeing 5th through 8th grade. So we have at our broadcast location, 5th and 6th is our preteen, 7th and 8th is middle school, and then obviously 9th to 12th is high school. So I was overseeing 5th through 8th. And then during that first year of doing both, fifth and sixth grade ministry just took on a life of its own, and we've been trying to nail down why, but it just kind of grew. And at that time, we were really accelerating our multi-site strategy. We, at the time when I came, we had 3 campuses, and now we're at 7, and that was 6 years ago. So you can imagine just the number of projects and things and systems that you have to put into place to make sure that it's landing the plane everywhere. And so our family pastor, Kurt Broadbeck, came to me and said, "Hey, I really think you should start overseeing 5th and 6th grade full time. We have a need to add a second service for it here at the broadcast campus at Carmel, but we want to have uniformity across all campuses so that every preteen student can have a similar experience as Northview students, regardless of what campus they attend and what size. But we need uniformity in curriculum and all kinds of other things." And so I've been doing that for almost the last 4 years now. And so I've kind of jumped all in with the preteen ministry world, and I've been learning a lot. And again, it's the youngest age group I've ever worked with because I was doing high school ministry before I came here. But I really, really enjoyed doing preteen ministry. There's some unique things about it that I'm sure we'll talk about. But God's been really blessing our ministry. And you're right. More and more churches that I talk to, man, they're trying to crack the code of how to do preteen ministry, or at least that older elementary, young middle school, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, somewhere in there, what they're trying to do with that age group. It's really, really important.
Yeah, I have a couple things running through my mind there as you were sharing that stuff. One, I didn't make the connection that you were on staff with Kurt, who I happen to know from going to like Next, an event that Preteen Pastors, and he wasn't there this year, I don't think. But like I didn't even make that connection. So when you said my family pastor, Kurt Robeck, I was like, oh, okay, I'm seeing this
that
now.
guy.
I gotta get Kurt on the podcast. I think I talked.
Please do. Yeah,
I never did. So tell him just set aside some time for me.
Yeah, absolutely, will do.
But the other thing I was thinking, you said that when you were leading 5th through 8th, the 5 and 6 kind of took off. Were they separate environments already at that point, or were they just one environment and it just 5th and 6th was growing? Like, how did that work in terms of taking off?
No, that's a good clarification. So here, I'll just speak for kind of our broadcast location, where I work. Friday night is when 7th and 8th grade meets, and then 5th and 6th grade at the time just met during the 9 a.m. primary weekend service. So it was the same environment, a physical environment, our student building, but because we don't have any programming for middle school and high school during the main weekend services, if we weren't doing anything for preteens, that building was just going to sit empty. And for us, it was a stewardship issue. It was like, how could we not utilize this incredible youth facility and the student rooms at our other campuses? And obviously now that we have 7, at the time we only had 3, and the other 2 were in portable environments. So this was really kind of the primary 5th and 6th grade thing happening. But we could see that we want to open up more campuses. And it's like, well, man, we need to dial that in a little more. And so I think just having more of a focus on it. I will say during that first year, it was difficult to kind of split my time. I had Drew Hall, who's on our staff now as our Westfield campus student pastor at the time. He just came out of an internship, and so he came on a staff part-time, and we tag teamed it a little bit with 7th and 8th and also with 5th and 6th. As to why it really took off, I mean, I think, honestly, just having a change from Northview kids to Northview students, kind of that, that transitional period, those kids were like, man, we cannot wait to get to the student ministry building. It was just a change in environment, a change in programming, a change in a voice, whether it was me or their small group leader was different. All that stuff mattered because I think they realized they were ready for something new and for something different. And eventually we just ran out of space. I mean, it eventually became just a critical mass issue. And we're like, well, at 11 o'clock, this is our most attended service, and we're not even doing 5th and 6th grade programming for that. So it's like, well, why don't we just move it to 9 and 11? And then we did that, and then we grew and grew and grew, and now we're doing it on Saturday nights as well. So now all 3 weekend services we're offering 5th and 6th grade. So there was a bit of an evolution to it, but I think it really started with just more of a intentionality of using our space to specifically tailor the programming and meet the needs of the preteens.
So how long has it been since you were doing it, even at the 9? How many years have you been doing it there, and then you expanded to the 11 and Saturday night?
Yeah, so we started 11 o'clock almost 4 years ago, but before that, it was at 9 a.m. for I think about 3 years. They tried some things. Kurt can speak to this when he goes on your podcast later. But Kurt was leading. He was middle school role for a number of years here at Northview, and I think at one point they tried Sunday afternoons. At one point, they had 7th and 8th grade included 6th grade, and then they went away from that because they were trying to do a 5-6 environment. And so it just kind of was trial and error for a while. And then eventually, I think they landed on that 9 a.m. hour for at least a few years before I came. And then, again, like I said, during that first year of doing both, we just had the 9 a.m. And then when I officially switched over to full-time 5th and 6th grade oversight, that's when we added the 11 o'clock. We added Saturday night 2 years ago. So we've been in full-fledged, offering it at every service for about, it'll be coming up at the end of the third full school year.
Yeah, and then with the 9 a.m., you've been doing it for even longer than that.
Yeah, longer than that.
A lot of people are making that shift now, but you've been doing it for years, which is helpful to just have you on the podcast and share what it's been like and what does it look like beyond launching it. You know what I mean? A lot of people are in that stage. Sure. So I'd love to ask, before we jump into what it does look like exactly, how did you set a vision for it? Now you came in, it was already happening at 9, but how did you set a vision for, we're now going to do this with our service. This is going to be our thing that we do 5th and 6th as a separate environment with parents, with volunteers. I mean, like you said, most kids are great with it because they're like, hey, I'm moving to something else. Been in elementary so long, I don't need much of a vision cast probably because I'm excited. But what about parents, leaders, staff? How did you set a vision for what it could be?
Yeah, I think the initial conversations that Kurt and I had were really around that topic. We had determined that we really feel like 5th and 6th grade students, if we can kind of capture them just being in awe of who God is, that God is so big and God is so great, but that God knows me personally, and that 5th and 6th grade could be a real time to begin that process of really owning their faith. So it's not just man, isn't God so awesome? Isn't God so great? But now it's like, how is God great in my life? I think, and I've said this before to a number of other leaders or even our volunteers here, I think kids are getting older, younger, if that makes sense. I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. There's culture, social media, accessibility to things, and it seems as though, if you look at the common 5th or 6th grader right now, maybe 10 to 15 years ago, they would have been more like a traditional middle school student. In our school systems here, even near Indianapolis, we have a couple of school systems that are so large, they actually have intermediate school where 5th and 6th grade are in a building by themselves. So middle school doesn't even start till 7th and 8th grade. So it's almost this, it is a transitional period, but it almost is kind of like middle school 1.0, like 7th and 8th grade is middle school 2.0, And so at some level, when Kurt and I talked about that, we figured, okay, this is a really formative time in their life. We have a model of ministry, which we may get into later, that we think is working for just the one service. But how do we set a vision for parents to say, listen, this is different than kids ministry, but it's not quite student ministry. But here's the deal. We want your students to have an active faith in living that out in community, because community is king. I mean, you know that, Nick. I mean, community is king for anyone, but for students, if we could combine their spiritual life and their social life as a middle school student, man, that would be like a really, really awesome combination. And so for us, it was like, okay, we've got the environment, we've got the space. How do we do small groups? Can we start writing specific curriculum just for 5th and 6th grade students versus what I was doing the first year, which was I'm writing curriculum for middle school students and I am just kind of tweaking it for 5th and 6th grade. See what I'm saying? Like it didn't feel, there was certainly intentionality behind it, but it just didn't feel that it was tailored absolutely, specifically, probably the best way to say it, to 5th and 6th grade students. And so as we casted that vision to parents, and to our leaders, they had seen the success of the student ministry overall. And I think that the draw was, I think they could see their 3rd and 4th grader maybe just ready for something different. At the time, we weren't doing weekly small groups in kids ministry. And so what would happen is we would have some families, I would get families bringing over their 3rd and 4th grader into the student ministry environment. Like, well, they're older for their age and they're just kind of tired. They're just kind of tired of the kid. Yeah, they're right. I've heard that, a million times. And Kurt made a good point. He said, if they were hanging out with their friends in kid ministry, this maturity thing wouldn't even be talked about. because they would be
Sure,
enjoying
'cause that'd be their
community.
home. Yeah.
That's right. And so it's like, man, how do we capture that type of community with fifth and sixth grade ministry? And so we went to a full-fledged like table group model, and we maybe can break that down a little bit later. But we're like, okay, we need to do that not just here at our campus, but we need to figure out how to make that happen at all the campuses, regardless if there's 10 kids or 150 kids. We need to figure out a way to get them in weekly small groups, but also get their large group teaching and environment at the same time. And so once we went that way, I don't know, I a little bit, it was kind of a proof was in the pudding, that it really grew and flourished and thrived. And I'm very, very thankful to God for it.
So tell us what it does look like. And, you alluded to some of the things there with table groups and stuff like that. So, and maybe it's changed over the years, but practically speaking, what does preteen ministry look like at your church? Like, what do you use for the content? What's the format? What do you do during the time you have them? All that stuff.
Yeah, it's good. So when a fifth or sixth grade student comes to any of our campuses, we try to immediately put them into a small group. And so our vision for that is that we see fifth and sixth grade ministry as kind of the onboarding for life groups moving forward in student ministry. In middle school and high school, our small groups meet during the week in people's homes. So we do home life groups for middle school and high school, but they start out many times as table groups in fifth and sixth grade. Does that make sense? So they actually are meant to go on, to keep going on, even with the same adult leaders. So when a fifth and sixth grade student comes into our environment, they check in if they're a first-time guest, and they are immediately put into a small group. And so what that means is the tables are at least delineated by gender. And then once critical mass continues to grow, then they're grade in gender. So you have like fifth grade boys and sixth grade girls or sixth grade guys. And then as you grow even more, then you can start breaking it down even by school system, which is what we do at our broadcast location. When you have a huge number of kids, then you're thinking, okay, well, if these groups are going to start meeting in homes in a couple of years, then we can do, okay, let's do fifth grade Noblesville boys, sixth grade Fishers girls. Those are just the names of some of the school systems around here. Because in seventh grade, when they start meeting in homes, geographically, that helps mom and dad get them to their group because they're not driving 45 minutes away to get to their small group. And so the onboarding is that they get to join a table group and they're with that same group of students and that same group of leaders weekly. In addition to that, they also do all their large group time at the same time. So when they come into the environment, they're sitting with their group even during the large group time. So they come in, we do something called the stupid video of the week. It's just me dumpster diving on YouTube to find what little gold nuggets I can find. But we have a countdown, and that there's an opening video, and the MC, whether it's me or one of our leaders, comes out and welcomes everybody. And we talk about, here are the three things we do at Northview Students, which is we learn about God, we make great friends, and we have fun. Just to kind of cast some vision even to the students is why we're here. Then we do a big group game, and then we do table time, which is 8 to 10 minutes of some opening small group discussion. They take attendance in their groups, so leaders can take attendance as well as get to know new kids. And the attendance sheets help them remind them of what their names are. I've had leaders say, this is really helpful to make sure I keep everybody straight. But then they do their highlight of their week, and they do some other small group icebreaker question, nothing crazy. But then that leads right into the worship time. So then they worship corporately. So we have our own student worship team that leads worship at 3 of our environments. The other campuses go into the main service for worship and then kind of dismiss to the student space. So there's a worship time, and then there's a message, 15 to 20 minutes of teaching content, sometimes even less than that. And then they go into their closing small group time, and then they're dismissed from there. I don't come back out and say, all right, table time's done. We're done, done with the service now. So from that point on, I'm really handing it off to our small group leaders to flesh out what they've been hearing in the message. And so that's kind of a normal service schedule for 5th and 6th grade.
Okay. How about, let's start with the content. Do you write, that content, the teaching yourself? Do you use something and then adapt it? Have you changed what it is over the years?
Yeah, so we write all of our own content. That was part of the reason why I think Kurt wanted me to move into a full-time oversight, because at the time we were writing content for the campus that I was at, but for the other campuses it was like, okay, let's purchase this and so you can adapt it. And he was like, listen, what you're doing is really good, like, which just to figure out a way to, adapt it so that way it can be executed at all of our campuses, whether they're in a portable environment or they're in a smaller environment than what we have at the broadcast campus. And so I started just writing all the content in house, and I've kind of developed 2 years worth of curriculum. Many of the series of which are recycled every 2 years because you only have a 2-year time frame, and so you can adapt and tweak and maybe add a different illustration or a different, if you use a clip from a video or something like that. I mean, all that stuff can change, and you change the game and some of the lesson plan, but the core content is still the same. And so we stopped buying curriculum for the other campuses, and instead, I'm kind of the mastermind of trying to figure out how is this going to work at every single environment. So there's a lot of collaboration with the student pastors at our other campuses to say, hey, is this content working? Hey, Caleb, you at the Benford campus, you've got maybe 6 to 8 students weekly. Is this working for you well? Hey, Aaron over at Lafayette, you've got 20. Is this working well for you? Hey, Rod, you've got 50. Is this working well for you? So just making sure that that not only is the content or the meat and the bones, is that working, but also just the way that it's fleshed out and the way it's taught and the way that the small groups process it, even stuff like the game. Hey, this game worked great at my campus, but if it's not working great at another campus, then that's a failure on me. And so there's just a lot of collaboration, but it's all in-house. And I think that we've learned to really develop our own content and to have a good feedback culture to make sure that it is working well in all environments.
Have you kind of had that same format for a long time, or did it get tweaked? You know what I mean? Or, did you fine tune that, or has it kind of been, that's what it's been? Maybe a small change here or there, but for the most part, that format and kind of schedule has worked.
Yeah, for the most part, that's what it's been since I started. Like I said, for that first year, I was I was writing it more from middle school and then adapting it for 5th and 6th. But when I switched over to full-time 5th and 6th, I really put my nose kind of to the grindstone and said, all right, what are some core teachings that we want to do for 5th and 6th grade specifically? And so once that was done, we kind of created a curriculum vault, if you will, so that way it could be used over and over again during the 2-year cycle. And so it's been that way really for the last 4 years.
Cool. Yeah, I think, when I hear about different preteen ministries, that format is very similar, and it does. In our elementary director and I were talking about this as we launched our 4th and 5th grade environment. And her experience has all been in the kids world, and for me having the knowledge of what our student ministry does, because that's part of my role as next gen pastor, I was telling her that there's so much of it that's actually the same. Like, I don't know if any children's or student pastor would want to hear that, but the reality is it's not all that different. If you look at like a large group, a small group, you know what I mean? Something,
yeah, no doubt.
Have fun, something. I mean, like the big overarching pieces are not that different, but what they look like and what do you do within them? How does it feel? That's where it's different. Even the order sometimes can be different. We have a friend who always in his preteen environment does worship at the end, because he feels like they need to loosen up through everything else, before they're willing to open up and worship that way. So he does that at the end, something he's done for years, even in a couple different churches. So, you can move the pieces around, and what you do with them is a little bit different. How would you say, so like your student ministry meets in home groups during the week, so that's a big difference there. How different is preteen from the other part of elementary? So kindergarten through 4th for you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So for elementary ministry, they kind of have, I think kindergarten through 2nd, they have worship together, and then 3rd and 4th grade do worship. We actually just started doing 3rd and 4th grade has their own specific worship time, and it's actually led by our middle school student worship team members, which is really cool. That's kind of cool to see that cross-pollination happening between ministries in terms of the family ministry dynamic. But then 3rd and 4th grade, I think 2 years ago, started doing weekly small groups, and we've just started adding them now for 1st and 2nd grade. So this is, I think they saw the success, and this isn't certainly due to me. I'm not trying to just be deferential. I really think God has just kind of blessed 5th and 6th grade ministry here uniquely. But I think people saw, man, we need to get our kids in a weekly group with a weekly leader that's consistent. I mean, consistency breeds community, and so. I think that formative time and that time where they can process their faith externally in groups is really, really crucial for any Christian, let alone a child. And so once we started adding those small groups to the elementary environment, I think they kind of started to see some of the seeds that have been growing in 5th and 6th grade ministry for the last couple of years. The difference being when they come into the student ministry environment, they're actually getting their large group and small group all at the same time versus like going to different areas of the room like they were in kids ministry. So like they come in and they actually sit with their table group even during the large group time. So it's not like rows of chairs. They're actually at their table group the entire time, which feels a little different because if you come into a normal student ministry space or any sort of church sanctuary or auditorium, it's pews or rows of chairs. It's not tables. So that's a pretty big change. So that way, when I get done with the message, I can say, all right, guys, go ahead to your groups for 10 to 15 minutes. And they're literally just turning their chairs around and they're in their groups already and they're debriefing. And so the large group, small group time happening all at once is probably the unique thing that 5th and 6th grade experiences. But when they get into middle school and high school, their large group time and their small group time are then separate. So like large group for middle school and high school is on a different night of the week. For our campuses other than the broadcast location, 7th through 12th is on Sunday night. At the broadcast location, middle school is Friday night, high school is Sunday night. So they have their large group time, teaching, worship, hangout time, but then the home groups obviously are during the week and home. So that there's a change that happens from elementary to 5th and 6th, and then the change from 5th and 6th to middle school and high school.
Yeah, and I think that change is so helpful. I just recorded a podcast with Shane Sanchez. We were talking about high school ministry and student ministry overall there. And we were at the end of the podcast, we just went down this other trail that we could have just done a whole podcast on, which was about kind of the fade in high school, 9th to 10th, and the kids started attending less and less by 11th and 12th. And I told him that I don't know if it's true for everywhere, but in our context, if by the time you're 11th, 12th grade, it's been similar enough, even though they're different ministries. And we've changed some of that recently to help address that, but it's been similar enough that you're just kind of done with it. And I think 4th and 5th, like if you have a 5th, 6th, like you do, and for us launching our 4th, 5th, that's going to be so helpful because they can look forward to something that's different and new and exciting. It's a momentum thing. Sooner than they used to be able to, right? They used to have to be in that same environment for 6 years. That's a long time.
That's a long time.
The older they get, I feel like the window's shorter.
No question.
When you're high school, 4 years in the same environment kind of is a long time.
Yeah, if you think about like a 3rd or 4th grader, I make this joke. The typical children's ministry environment that at least that I was exposed to growing up. I mean, you could have preschool through 6th grade all in one room, and many churches still do. And by the time you get in 4th grade, I mean, and if you're a kid that's in that environment, it's like, I'm tired of doing these stupid songs and these stupid motions. I can't deal with this anymore. And that's why the age old problem, I think, with a lot of kids ministry workers is how do we engage our older elementary students? Well, by having a transitional period that's different enough, an environment that's different enough, it actually communicates to those students, hey, we see your needs as unique. And we're going to try to do something about that versus like just going, well, this is just how we do kids ministry here. Or, oh, this is just how we do student ministry here. It's this grade to this grade, and that's just the way we do it. And I think if churches could kind of hold that a little more loosely, and for us, again, this speaking specific to Northview, our context is we're not doing middle school and high school programming during church. So if we're not going to do that, then the student building and student room is just going to sit empty. And to me, that's a bad stewardship thing. And so it's like we have an incredible environment that 5th and 6th graders would love, and it would be different enough. And guess what? All those comments about, oh, these songs are so dumb, or oh, this, I'm tired of the message, or oh, I'm over this, or I'm too mature for this. You put them in a new environment, and you put them in a weekly small group with their friends, and they're having fun, and they think the stupid video is funny. It's like all that stuff doesn't matter anymore. Just by making those changes and just engaging them in a different way. And I think that is actually the real secret sauce is, for me, these kids, I think ages 10 to 14, and I've mentioned this to our leaders before and have been on some other platforms that have mentioned this as well. Ages like 10 to 14 is the second most significant time of change in the lifespan of a human outside of the first 2 years of life. And so from a cognitive standpoint, developmental standpoint, emotional standpoint, hormonal standpoint, all kinds of things. And I think even a spiritual standpoint. And so are we tailoring an environment to preteens and middle school students that meets their specific needs? And for us, it was like, we have to do this. Or we have to add some sort of uniqueness from elementary into preteen to middle school into high school. And you're right. It is tough to stick with it all the way for high school. But that actually for us is the longest time frame they're in something. Because before it's like 3rd and 4th grade, they have something. 5th and 6th grade has something. 7th and 8th grade has something. Well, then in high school, you got a 4-year run versus 2. And there is a more unique challenge to that. But we're hopeful that, as I said earlier, if they can develop that, if social life and spiritual life can become one, then the community's there, and it's deep-rooted community by the time they get into high school. And even though they might be a little disenchanted with some of the programming or, it's youth group, if they've got their core solid group, they're going to stick with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about what it looks like at different campuses. And for some people listening, they don't have a multi-site church, but this will still be helpful because, like you said, the broadcast location has 5,000 to 6,000 people attending. So there's a lot of people listening most people, vast majority of people, whose church is not that size, but you've got campuses that are, 300 to 1,200? So very different. But you do this everywhere, which that's not always common. A lot of times, for good reason, in a multi-site settings, there's things you don't do at every campus. I mean, there's a lot of churches that launch sites, and a lot of times they don't even launch a student ministry at all because they're sending a couple hundred people. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a campus of 300 or 400. And out the gate, they're not going to do student ministry. They'll wait a year or two or whatever. And I totally get that. I'm on board. You got to do the things you can do well, But in your case, you've prioritized this to the point where it's at every campus. So tell us what it looks like at different campuses. Is it, basically the same, less kids, so you tweak some things? How's that work?
Yeah, so that's a great point of clarification because you're right. A lot of the people listening, they're going to come from all different sizes of churches, and some of them are one site, some of them are multiple. And I think some of the application of this will be pretty universal and holistic. But for us, when we started launching campuses at Northview, some of the environments were portable, and so you couldn't do middle school and high school ministry because you had nowhere to meet. You were using a school that you only had for, the Sunday morning, from 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. or something. We were setting up everything and tearing it down. But because we were 5th and 6th grade met during church, 5th and 6th grade was kind of like the early beginnings of student ministry on that campus. So you actually could kind of germinate a student ministry that would flourish because once they moved out of portable environments and did get a permanent campus, if you've been doing 5th and 6th grade ministry on the ground from day one, which every campus has been because it meets during the main weekend services, it's like, well, we've already got something started. And so that was a really crucial thing for us. But as far as what it looks like in the other campus environments, again, in a setting where you may have 8 to 10 kids, you're probably going to function more like a large small group. And so, you can still do the programmatic elements, like the stupid video and the game, maybe instead of a game being maybe group versus group, maybe you do boys versus girls, or it's one versus one versus one, it's individual. Or as far as worship, if you are in an environment or a campus where maybe you don't have a student worship team developed quite yet. That's the long-term goal, is that we'd like to have worship in all of our student ministry environments. But if you don't, then you just hop into the worship environment with the adults for the first 15 to 20 minutes, and then you dismiss to your student ministry space, and then you can kind of go from there. Some campuses, like I said, they function like a large small group, and when they break into their small group time, at the very least, you can do boys and girls. So if you've got a really strong 2 strong female leaders and 2 strong male leaders outside of the student pastor, you can have weekly small groups. Now, again, it's going to be small, but at least you're delineating by gender. And then as you get a little bit bigger, then you can do grade and gender. And as you get a little bit bigger, then you could do, grade, gender, geography. That's kind of our tagline. But depending upon your size, it is scalable. You can make that work because the small group time is the real driving force of why this ministry has been successful. And so the programmatic elements are adaptable in the sense that you could change the way the game is played, or you can handle worship differently. Obviously, if I'm teaching to 10 students versus 150, my communication style is going to be different. And so the message script that I'm writing and giving to our campuses needs to have enough neutrality that the student pastors can then adapt. So, for instance, if I add a illustration or like more of a message illustration, something tactile that they're having the tables or that's being seen from stage, that's going to maybe be executed a little differently when it's more large group scale, 50 students or more, versus like a small group of 10 to 12. You still could do the illustration, just going to be done differently. If you're sharing, a video clip, you just got to make sure you have the technology available that people can see it in a smaller environment as well as a larger environment. And so there are some of these subtle differences, but the main part of it is still the same. That is still uniform. The curriculum is the same. The teaching series is the same. When I'm writing a message script, I'll say, instead of me saying, hey, tell that one story about that one time with this one person, and I just add my own personal story in the script like I would for my own personal message notes. Instead, I'll say, leader's note, share a time where you had difficulty trusting in God. So then the student pastor, whoever the volunteer that's teaching, can then give that specific illustration to them. But then the rest of the content is more of a skeleton, and they're putting the meat on the bones. So those are just some nuances there that, again, there's some freedom given to the student pastors, but it's not completely autonomous, because at the same time, they're not just choosing their own curriculum or choosing their own series, or, hey, we're abandoning the lesson plan for today and we're doing our own thing. I mean, there is still a level of accountability there, because, again, we're one church in multiple locations. And if we're going to honor the heart of that, then we have to offer a consistent experience, regardless of size or a campus or size of student ministry, at every location. So they're actually getting what we really hold most dear in Northview students. So that's how I would answer that question.
Well, that's in some ways how anybody adapts children's or student curriculum to their church anyway.
Absolutely.
And there are organizations like Orange that do a great job of giving you different options and trying to do some of that for you. But at the end of the day, no organization can serve the diversity of the church.
Yeah. Your people best.
You got to customize it. Yeah. You got to customize it for your context, which makes sense.
Yeah.
How about, let's shift gears and talk a little bit about like the volunteers in there. And by the way, when you say table groups, you physically have round tables. They sit around in chairs.
Yeah.
That's what the environment looks like? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that's a common like layout or method approach with preteen is to go to that direction. We have, we were, thinking about that. We definitely want to do something different than sitting on carpets, which is they do in elementary. And so we have kind of furniture circles is the best way I could describe it.
Yeah.
It's the same idea that they're in the group the whole time. There just isn't the table there. But as we talk about volunteers and leaders, do you have older students serving in the ministry? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah. So to answer your question, yeah, we do. And just to piggyback on what you said there about kind of furniture circles, two of our student ministry, we have 5 student ministry values at Northview students. And here are 2 of them. One is that community is king, which I've mentioned before. And the second one of the 5 is circles are better than rows, to kind of borrow that old Andy Stanley phrase. But we think that spiritual growth is really, really important in the context of community. And I think for this specific age group, and this is going to speak to the leadership piece, I heard Marco Strecker, say that for preteens and middle school students, it is just as important for them to externally process their faith in conversation as it is to get the accuracy of what they believe right. Now, Marco and I are, and you, Nick, we are pro theology. We are pro accuracy. And so don't hear us say that if they're off the rails and trying to explain salvation or some other spiritual discipline or some sort of concept, that we're not going to redirect them. But developmentally and cognitively, they've got to talk this out. They've got to process, because this is the beginning stages of them like having their own faith expression that's unique, especially for church kids. Because I think up to this point, they kind of have this inherited faith, mom and dad's God. Well, they got to answer the question at some point. Do I believe in mom and dad's God? Do I believe in it? And I think the way that takes shape is through conversation and is through discussion. And so we feel that for leadership specifically, our goal would be to have at least one adult and one high school student serving as the small group leaders of every single 5th and 6th grade small group. Because the uniqueness of the adult leader is we believe that every child and student here at Northview should have at least 5 meaningful connections with adults outside of their own, family. And so both the adult leader can be that voice because they might be the age of their mom and dad, but they're not their mom and dad. And they might be more comfortable opening up to them because they're not their mom and dad. So that's an important role. But in addition to that, they have this high school student. And I don't care what student, what context, what church, small church, big church. I think it's almost somewhat universal that students it's impossible for them to imagine what it's like to be the age of their parents. Like they know they'll get there one day. Like I in my head, I know I'll be 40 or 45 or 50 one day, but I just can't imagine it. However, they can imagine what it's like to be the age of a high school student. just like a high school student can imagine what it's like to be the age of a college student or young adult. So there's unique influence there because they can't imagine, because it's the next step in life. So this high school student that's serving alongside the adult has really unique influence, mostly because many of them actually came up through the environment themselves. They came up through 5th and 6th grade, and they had a high school leader that spoke into their life and an adult leader. And so when our high school students, when they're freshman year, they can start serving in 5th and 6th grade ministry. They can say, listen, I had a high school leader that spoke in my life, and now I get to be that leader for you. And so the adult's mentoring the 5th and 6th grade students, but the adult is also mentoring the high school student, and the adult and high school student are partnering together, to lead this group, this consistent group of 6 to 8 or 8 to 10 students every single week. And I don't know, I just really see so much value in that. And so when we recruit leaders, for adults, obviously, we're looking at parents or other adults that want to serve as just a weekly small group leader. They want to have a little tribe and a little, if they've got a shepherding heart or a mentoring type heart, that's a great fit for them to serve. But for high school students, we come to them and say, listen, this is a way for you to give back. This is a way for you to serve. I mean, you're never more like Jesus than when you're serving. That's another one of our values. And so we're constantly giving opportunities to our middle school and high school students. Hey, you got to figure out a way to serve within the greater life of the church. Don't just make your faith only dependent upon your youth group experience. You need to actually figure out ways to serve, certainly your community and your neighborhood, but also within the life of the church. And so for high school students specifically, 5th and 6th grade is a great way to do that. But I treat them just like any other adult. So the training meetings that I hold, they're for high schools and adults. When we talk about specific policies and training procedures, even with if a 5th or 6th grader says, hey, I've been abused, or hey, I've been thinking about suicide, I would tell both the high school student and the adult the same information, even though a high school student in the high school environment will have the same protocol followed by an adult. Does that make sense? Like, yeah. I'm kind of treating them as a real tag team partner, and not like a delineation like, well, no, you're the assistant leader and the adult's really the real leader kind of thing. And so I have a lot of high school students that are just so sensational. I use that word appropriately. They are sensational small group leaders because they are leading out of the growth of their own life, because they're making decisions for Christ and they're growing in their faith, and they remember what it's like to be a middle school student because it wasn't too long ago for them. And they know that they've got a strong community in their own life because they're a part of a life group. In fact, a lot of times the recruiting happens because, I might have a junior guy that's like, man, I'm going to start serving in 5th and 6th grade ministry. He has a really positive experience. Well, guess what? He's going to go tell his buddies in his life group, hey, you got to come check this thing out. And so the recruiting just almost happens kind of happenstance. Or same thing with the girls groups. It's like a freshman girl one time came to me and said, I really want to serve. In fact, not only do I want to serve, five of us want to all serve at the same service time together, but we don't have to be at the same group. And I was like, oh my gosh, like you're doing my job for me. Like I don't have to go out and find them, because they had a positive experience, not only in the ministry when they went through as a student, but they know that this is a way for them to uniquely give back. And so, but I train them the same way. And so when I do resources and training meetings, they're all at the same time with the students and with the adults.
That's great. I agree with everything you said. I love empowering students to serve and gives them ownership and all that stuff. And it works well for you because this happens on Sunday mornings or Saturday night when students don't have their ministry meeting. So there's not a competition.
That's right.
There. So they can serve with you.
Yeah.
How about we wrap up with this? You have a toolkit you've created to help train small group leaders, whether they're high school students or adults. Tell us what is in the toolkit. How do you use it? I imagine they get it when they first start serving, but do you come back to it at any point? What's that look like?
Yeah. So this was unique to this year. We really felt that we needed to do a better job of resourcing our leaders. It's great that we do training meetings, Nick. It's great that we, have appreciation events, and it's great that we send out weekly correspondence or texts and, hey, your handwritten notes, hey, you're doing a great job. And I think we were excelling extremely well in the shepherding and in the affirmation of our leaders, but I think we were lacking in just the nuts and bolts training of our leaders. And so, and I'm going to just come right out and say, I had absolutely zero to anything to do with this toolkit idea. Our team, our student ministry team is pretty large because we're a larger church. And we eventually realized we needed to start sharing the workload and start putting people in terms of our staff people into seats on the bus where they could really excel. And so our team, under Kurt's leadership, as well as Kent Bierstrom, our student ministry pastor centrally, decided to go to this pods idea. And so there are 4 pods on our team. So we have a pod for curriculum, a pod for life groups, a pod for team members and leaders, and a pod for events. So we're basically sharing the workload because we just realized we have too many cooks in the kitchen. So it's like, how do we share? We all have the same spiritual DNA. We obviously have all the same ministry DNA. How do we flesh that out in a way that's manageable for everybody? And so our life group pod, a few members of our staff under Jen Blessing, who for a long time oversaw all life groups across campuses, under her direction and many of the people that are on that pod team, they came up with these toolkits that were based on the Lead Small principles. And so if you've read Lead Small, it's a great resource, a great book, and from Orange. And so I would recommend you get that book to kind of have more of the holistic sense of why we did it. But the toolkits we need to put some elements or some items in the toolkit that represent each of those 5 values. So for instance, one of the values talks about just creating a safe space for students to share. And I believe wholeheartedly, I heard Tom Shefchunas say once that any church is only as safe as what someone's brave enough to admit. That'll preach. That's good. Yeah. That's really good. And so the idea of, okay, what can we put in there that indicates that this group, whether you're a 5th or 6th grade table group or a middle school or high school small group in a home, what can we do to kind of teach this lesson? So we put in a pair of safety goggles, and they had a Sharpie, and at the beginning of the school year, everybody, the leaders talked about, hey, this is a safe place to come and ask questions, to talk about what's going on in your life. And we're here to support each other. We're here to love you, and we're here to be in community with one another. But as a commitment to this, let's all sign the safety goggles. Now, pretty silly, right? But at the same time, it emphasized the value that's very, very dear to us, that obviously the Lead Small book talks about. There, one of the values talks about being present. And so things like we included birthday cards in the toolkit, so they can write a birthday card to all the students in their group. We included little blank business cards, so that way they could partner with parents. That's one of the other values. And so you write in your contact info on the back of the card, and you send a card to the parents in your group saying, hey, this is a way for us to get to know you, and as a small group leader of your student. We included 3 event reimbursements. So there was a little tear off in there. Hey, you could go to a student's choir performance or soccer game or 4-H event or whatever. And if you say the ticket stub and this little tear off thing, you can turn that into our student ministry department. We'll reimburse you up to 3 events for the school year, just as a way to say, hey, we believe that you need to be relational outside of just the 4 walls of the church building or outside of the 4 walls of the home that you meet in for your small group. And so we could go on and on. I could maybe attach a photo or a list of some of the other items that are in there. But regardless of what's actually in there, here's where we're communicating to our leaders. We realize that you need to be equipped. We need to set you up to win. And what's setting you up to win is to give you resources and things that will help you, because especially in the home group settings, I mean, I'm not going into a different home group every single week, and neither is our middle school and high school pastor, but they're going to debrief with them during the week. And so how can we set them up to succeed and to win in the group environment? And these toolkits are a really, really good resource. I'm so proud of the way our team worked on it and gave good feedback, and our communications team here at Northview made it in-house. So it was really, really awesome that we have a real luxury of having creative graphic design people and creative communications people, and the messaging of what was said in the resources and what was said in the little training guide in there. All that stuff. It was a real team effort from Northview, but so that it was done so that our small group leaders could succeed in their role, which is so, so important. Leaders need to feel empowered, certainly, but they need to feel equipped. And a lot of leaders feel empowered but not equipped, and some leaders feel equipped but not empowered. So you got to have both. And so this is our way of trying to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Let's put in the show notes, picture list of what you'd put in there. I think people would love to see that. I think that would be great. How can people connect with you if they have any questions or something came up here as you talk through this they'd love to ask you about?
Yeah, I mean, probably the easiest way is you can go to our website, northviewchurch.us. There's a students page there. You can get more general information about student ministry. But as far as me specifically, all of the email addresses at Northview are our first and last name with a dot in the middle at northviewchurch.us. So mine is zach.matchett@northviewchurch.us. You can also follow me on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I'd love to connect with you. I hope that obviously I'm the one on the podcast, Nick, and we're doing this conversation together, but I hope that we are speaking for all youth ministry workers here, that these challenges are not just unique to our church and your church, Nick, but these are challenges that are felt everywhere. And so I want to help resource and help learn from you guys that are listening, and help maybe even teach some of the things we've been learning here. And so I would say those are probably the primary ways to get in touch with me.
Great. That's helpful. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast to talk about this. Like we said, a lot of people are making this jump now to doing something for preteen ministry, but you obviously been doing it for a while. So it's good to hear from somebody that's been doing it for a while and in some different settings, different campuses of different sizes and all of that. And yet it's the same goal, same vision, and it looks a little bit different, but for the most part, you're doing the same thing. So that's awesome. Keep up the great work, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Nick.
Well, there you go. Hopefully, even if you aren't starting a preteen ministry, if you're still listening now, then you heard the part about the small group leader training, what they give to leaders. I thought that was pretty cool. And you can see that and more in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 137. Coming out of that interview, some of the action items I think about are, obviously, if you're starting a preteen ministry, there's a whole lot of action items that you could take. You could take some of the ideas of how they do it and implement that for your ministry. I think it'd be great to even, hopefully you're in the Caught in Between workshops that Dan Scott's doing with Orange. And you can email me about that and I can give you some information if you're not aware of that already. But if nothing else, you're buying the Caught in Between book and using some of that information. Maybe you're not launching a preteen ministry. Maybe you have one, or you just want to use some of the principles in whatever ministry you lead. I think an action item would be, what's the one idea that you heard in the podcast here that would relate to your ministry that you could implement in the next month? Maybe it's the format. Maybe it's how they do the games. Maybe it's just the idea that you're going to segment out experiences a little bit so that students have something to look forward to as they get older, right? Maybe you're going to do a YouTube video like Zach does. What's one thing that you can pull that you could implement if you're not necessarily going to start a preteen ministry, or maybe you don't have one? Because if you have one, I think, and if you're like me, we just launched ours when I was interviewing with Zach, but I was sitting there thinking, okay, what does he do that we don't? Is there something we should add, tweak, change, adjust, that kind of thing? I think that was how I approached it. So those are a few thoughts that I had coming out of that interview. Appreciate Zach taking the time to come on the podcast with us. I am trying to get Kurt on. So as you heard us talk about that, I'm going to try to get Kurt on. And I think we're going to talk about the family strategy they have at their church, which I think everybody will be interested in hearing. So yeah, there you go. Get the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 137. You're going to see that small group kit that they give out to new small group leaders for sure. Check out ministryboost.org if you're interested in that 5 barriers course. It'll be $10, but just for a couple weeks before it goes to the normal price. And yeah, if you leave a rating or review on the podcast, that really helps. I appreciate that. Thanks for listening. As always, I hope it's helpful to you and to your ministry. So until next time, hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you again on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.